When Triumph announced they'd be bringing out a Speed Twin RS, the internet took a collective gasp. It was to be the pimped up sporty version of the bike that we had all been craving ever since the Speed Twin was first introduced in 2019. However, since its release, my general feeling is that people are a little bit indifferent towards it. Yes, it has Öhlins shocks, some go faster paint schemes and a quick shifter, but the other changes Triumph made were either a bit meh or just outright bad. Now, when it was first announced, I actually wanted to buy one, but after an underwhelming test ride, I decided instead to buy a low mileage second-hand Speed Twin and upgrade it to the RS spec that I think Triumph should have gone for. So in this video, I'll show you what I've done and I'll talk you through where I think this bike is better than the official RS. Now I'm going to start by looking at what Triumph got wrong with the RS. Firstly, Triumph took the already pretty sporty riding position and made it even sportier, which of course is code for more uncomfortable. They lowered the handlebars by 60mm and gave them a 9mm longer reach, as well as raising the foot pegs by 6.5mm and moving them back by a quite significant 40mm, which is almost 2 inches. Now that for me was quite a strange decision, given they just discontinued the Thruxton RS because people didn't want the uncomfortable riding position, and the Speed Twin was already quite a face down arse up bike compared to most sporty naked bikes, so the last thing it needed was a less comfortable seating position. Now the colour schemes are a personal choice of course, but while I think the sapphire black really suits the go faster stripes on the fuel tank, the Barheart orange just isn't befitting of a 60s retro bike for me, and as far as I'm concerned, Triumph have yet to improve on the two colour options from the Gen 1 bike in 2019. However, worst of all was the new dash. Now the beauty of the Speed Twin is that it has sporting pretensions without losing any of the charm of the Bonneville family, and those twin analogue clocks were a big part of that. Now had Triumph stuck with a twin clock design and used a stylish modern digital TFT display that mimics analogue dials, I don't think people would have complained. But instead, they just lifted the basic dash off their entry-level bike, the Trident 660, which is a bike that costs half as much as the Speed RS, and I personally think the dash looks a bit naff and just doesn't suit this bike. And speaking of the price, the RS came in at 14.5 grand in the UK, which is 2 grand above the base bike and makes it an awful lot of money for a 100 horsepower retro bike like this. All in all then, this is just not what I wanted out of a Speed RS, so I decided to see if I could do better. My criteria for a Triumph RS is top spec suspension, an aftermarket exhaust, and a few bits of bling to tart it up. Now I needed a bike as a base of course, and I wanted something that felt like a new bike, so I tried to get the lowest mileage bike I could find, and boy did I absolutely smash that criteria. I managed to find this 5-year-old Gen 1 bike with a barely believable 23 miles on the clock for £8,250, which is a full £6,250 less than the official RS. It was in for me what is the best paint scheme, Storm Grey, which has those lovely hand-painted coach lines down the tank and a little bit of sparkle in the grey paint. And crucially, it came with one of the first accessories I personally associate with a Triumph RS model, an aftermarket exhaust. And I always think of the 2018 Speed Triple RS, which had those lovely twin arrow cans on it. So these carbon fibre tipped Zard cans were an absolute must for me. They make the bike look way more sporty, they tidy up the rear end really nicely, and of course they sound nice and fruity. Next on my RS list was the other must-have, suspension, which to be fair has always been a weak point on the Speed Twin. Now I did want Öhlins, but my colour choice might split opinion, and I decided that the classic Öhlins Gold doesn't really suit the stealth nature of the Speed Twin, so I went for the black and silver TR924 shocks instead. Now I think these shocks suit the aesthetic of the bike really well, while still looking a little bit bling with their machined aluminium housings. And more to the point, they have absolutely transformed how the bike handles, while actually also simultaneously making it more comfortable. Now for the front forks, the limitation with my Gen 1 bike is that the forks are right way up, rather than the sportier upside downies that you get on the new RS. So I wanted to offset that disadvantage as much as possible, and I went for the most premium internal cartridge kit I could find, which was from Nitron. Again, the bits that you can see are the premium looking black and silver machined aluminium, and again they make the bike handle noticeably better than before, while also making the bike feel a lot less crashy over bumps. Given my choices so far, it won't surprise you that I prefer the more subtle black stanchions on this bike over the flashier gold forks on the new RS, and the suspension upgrades I've gone for have made a night and day difference to how the bike feels. It's more sure-footed in the corners and encourages me to ride much faster than the standard suspension ever did, which is exactly what you want from a Speed Twin RS. And while Triumph could never have got this exhaust through emissions tests, unless they copied Volkswagen, for me the exhaust makes as big a difference as the suspension, and it gives a really throaty bark every time I accelerate hard out of a corner, which again makes me want to ride it harder. The final performance upgrade I made was the tyres. Now I didn't actually originally plan to change the tyres, but they were almost 6 years old when I bought the bike, and they actually felt quite unstable when I was pushing on through the corners, so I took the opportunity to upgrade to the rubber that I think best suits what a Speed Twin RS should be. The official RS comes with track-ready fast road tyres in the shape of Metzeler Racetech RRs, which is just far too much tyre for this engine and chassis in my opinion, and it feels like Triumph are trying to persuade you that it's a sportier bike than it actually is. Instead then, I went for Michelin Power 6s, which are more of a fast road tyre than a road and track tyre. Now they still have plenty of grip, and I've not got anywhere near the limit of their capabilities, and they have the added advantage that they will warm up quicker than the Metzeler's Triumph chose, as well as being more capable in the wet if you ever get caught in a downpour. And as a Brucey bonus, I also think they look really cool and actually add to the sporting look of the bike. With an uprated exhaust, more sophisticated suspension and sticky rubber taking care of the performance mods, it was time to add some bling to complete the premium RS look. The Triumph headlight bezel adds a bit more machined aluminium to the front of the bike, which helps to make it look a bit more premium than the standard plastic part. And the same is true of the Triumph bar end mirrors that I added, which are round in shape as opposed to the stock oblong shaped mirrors. And I personally think round mirrors tie in better with the retro look of this bike. I also changed the indicators, again to switch to a rounded shape from the standard more pointy kind of shape, and these are multi-function indicators, so they have this aluminium centerpiece that again ties in really nicely with the general aesthetic of the bike. And finally I added these Triumph clutch and alternator badges, which are ribbed for my pleasure, and which just look a little bit nicer than stock. And with all of that done, this is the final result. Now for me, this is exactly what I wanted from a Speed Twin RS in terms of the way it looks, handles and sounds. The tyres and suspension mean the handling is now absolutely sublime, and I would challenge 99% of riders to notice the difference between this and the official RS. It also sounds gruff and mean, and it has all the extra shiny little accoutrements that make it feel like the premium bike you expect from an RS. And of course it comes in what for me is the best paint scheme of any of the 3 generations of the modern Speed Twins, while also retaining those lovely analogue clocks. But given that one of my complaints with the RS was the cost, how much did I end up spending on my DIY RS? Well, the bike cost £8,250 of course. I spent £1,700 on the suspension and £1,100 on the other mods that I've covered in this video, which gives a grand total of £11,000, which in turn represents a saving of £3,500 on the official RS. And of course you could easily save a couple of £1,000 more on the cost of the bike if you went for one with more than 23 miles on the clock. However, I was always going to be a little limited, so is there anything I would have liked to add in an ideal world? Well, the one area the official RS bests my DIY RS is the brakes, and the proper version has the latest Brembo Stylema calipers, whereas my Gen 1 has to make do with these measly standard Brembo 4-piston calipers. Now I'll admit the Stylemas are a lot sexier than my brakes, and I'm sure they're very good, but to be fair, the standard Brembos are still really good on this bike, and more than enough for a 210 kilo, 100 horsepower bike like this. And while I do really like the paint job on my bike, I will admit that an RS probably deserves something a little more in your face, and I do think the Sapphire Black RS looks more aggressive than the Storm Grey I chose. And finally there is of course the quick shifter, which I did really like on my test ride of the new RS, despite it being quite clunky at low revs. And if I could just plug that into my bike, I would definitely take it, but to be fair, I'm not convinced it's worth it, given that that comes at the cost of a more uncomfortable leg bend. Now the title of this video is Triumph messed up the Speed Twin RS, so I made a better one. But there is of course a degree of hyperbole in there, and I don't really think I know better than Triumph. I'm sure they do extensive market research into what their customers really want from an RS model, and what this bike represents is simply what I wanted from a Speed Twin RS, rather than what I think Triumph should have done as such. But I would be really interested to hear what you think, so let me know if you prefer the official RS or my DIY version, and tell me what changes you would have made if you did the same thing. Now, if you want to see how my DIY RS actually rides, I've just got back from an 800-mile tour of France and Belgium, and I'll be uploading those videos next, so make sure you like and subscribe for them, and until next time, ride safe.